Hello, everybody. We're just gonna give it a minute or so all of our participants can get logged in. All right, it's 11:01, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar on the Inflation Reduction Act. We are so pleased of the turnout that we have for today's webinar. We have more than 300 registrants, so thank you all for taking some time to come and listen to information about the act and the important tax provisions that are in it. I'd like to welcome our speakers for today's webinar. We have Thad Ng, Jeff Trinka, and AJ Reynolds, and they are going to walk you through the act and the various tax provisions. And they will also be answering questions throughout the webinar. So feel free to put them in the Q&A whenever you have a question. We'll be monitoring them and answering them throughout. So enjoy the presentation, and thank you, gentlemen. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Meg and Jeff and AJ. Good to be with you here today. So we're going to do an overview of the Inflation Reduction Act. As with a lot of bills in Washington, it seems like they never come together, or it's constant delay, and then it happens really fast. And that was the case with this bill. It has a long history going back to the Build Back Better bill. And then kind of came together the last few weeks before they left for the August recess. So we're going to give a little background on how that came together, go through some tax provisions. AJ's going to provide some insight there, and then Jeff is going to dive into some of the IRS funding and the details around that. So for the timeline, if folks remember, back in the fall, I mean, there had been a lot of talk about stimulus bills, ever since President Biden came into office. There was the bill that passed in March of his first year in, and then they rolled out this Build Back Better plan in October, which was a really big bill. I think it was initially somewhere around $5 trillion, and it got scaled down to about $3 trillion when they rolled it out in October. And a lot of provisions. It was going to move through reconciliation, which meant it would be a party line vote in the Senate. Essentially, they would need all 50 Democrats to sign on, and then have Kamala Harris be the tiebreaker. And a lot of important things in there that enrolled agents care about. One being all this additional IRS funding, which we'll get into, and then a lot of tax provisions. On December 19th, 2021, Senator Manchin famously went on one of the shows and said he could not support Build Back Better in its current form. Inflation was going up. He felt like the tax provisions in there weren't right. And the whole sort of process blew up because they did need all 50 senators on board for this to move forward. And so then we sort of began the deja vu of sort of Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin having discussions, sort of, hearing bits and pieces about maybe there's momentum, will something happen, won't something happen. Senator Sinema had weighed in with her views on tax provisions, but we really didn't get any traction throughout the spring and even the early summer. It was kind of a black box and a big question mark whether legislation would actually get done. And then we found out on July 27th that more progress had been happening than many thought. when Senator Manchin and Schumer announced an agreement on a scaled down reconciliation package that was a lot smaller than initially contemplated, but it had a fair amount of tax provisions in there, some on energy and climate, some pay-fors to raise the money, and then it also had the $80 billion for IRS. Senator Sinema was kind of the wild card after that announcement came out. She made very clear she had not been part of those negotiations between Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin, and she had some ideas on what should be included. And so some of the tax provisions that we'll get into were adjusted at the end and scaled back, and then a new one, the 1% tax on stock buybacks, was put in to cover some of the changes, but they were able to get to yes. And then on August 7th, which was a Sunday, after sort of a whole weekend of negotiations, the Senate passed the Inflation Reduction Act. And then the House, which had already left for recess, they had already gone home for their August recess. They flew back into town that Wednesday and voted on a Friday, August 12th, to pass the bill, which was shortly after signed by the president. So, the narrow margins proved to be true. It was a party line vote. It passed the Senate 50-50, and then Kamala Harris was the tiebreaker, and in the House, passed by a narrow margin as well. There were some folks in the House, some Democrats in the House, that had said, if this does not include the SALT fix, the state and local tax cap, there were congressmen from New Jersey and New York that really wanted to raise that cap. They said, we are not voting for it. But at the end of the day, they caved, agreed to vote for it, said they would address that issue another day. And Speaker Pelosi was able to get the votes to pass the bill. So, the main topic today, what's in there? There's a lot of stuff in there. We're going to start with some tax provisions and some of the, as I would call, pay-fors that might have some impact on EAs, but also just sort of help fund this bill. One was this 15% minimum corporate tax on book income for companies averaging more than $1 billion a year in revenue. This is one where Sinema had some initial concerns. And so they did come in that last week and they made an exemption for accelerated depreciation. And then on that Sunday that they passed it, they ended up making some other changes around subsidiaries for private equity firms. Some folks were saying this was, would harm small businesses if these folks that had been acquired by a private equity firm subject to the tax weren't exempted. And so they were exempted at the last minute as well. But AJ, I don't know if you want to add anything on this 15% minimum tax.
Yeah, we can pretty much rest assured that we are not going to deal with it in this organization. And I will give you some brief facts. It's estimated about 30% of the existing Fortune 500 companies, which are 150 taxpayers, will account for 70%, or the 313 of the 450 billion that they anticipate to generate the revenue. So I personally might represent some executives, but I don't represent the companies in Fortune 500. So I think we're pretty safe on this one, but I just wanted to throw that in.
Great. Well, I'll go to the next one, the stock buyback. And I'll say briefly, the bill that Manchin and Schumer came out with had a provision on carried interest, essentially narrowing that loophole. So hedge fund managers essentially would have to pay a higher tax rate. That was one of the things Sinema was opposed to, and they took out of the bill. And so they had to make up that revenue somewhere. And they went back to the 1% excise tax on stock buybacks, which had been a provision that had been floating around, but was not initially in the version of this that came out. And AJ, I don't know if you want to add anything. It's pretty straightforward, but add anything on the excise tax.
Yes, and it's mainly for companies that are traded on the marketable exchange, such as the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. So it won't affect any of our clients when you think of maybe stock purchase of an S Corp or a C Corp. So it's going to be traded on the exchange, but I will say that it's going to affect more people than you think, just for the mere fact of that if you have a 401k or individual stocks, this is going to make a little bit of a niche in your return. But at the end of the day, not much for us.
Great. And then the research deduction, and this is one that a lot of people might not be aware of. And I know the initial law went into place, I think around 2015, that allowed for a deduction on FICA payroll tax on the employer portion of it. That is, I'll just say, for sort of context of who this applies to, it's for small businesses. You have to have less than 5 million in revenues for this to apply, and you have to be a newer business. If you've had revenue for more than 6 years, I believe it is, then it does not apply for you. So it's really for those startup small businesses. They enhanced this tax credit from 250,000 to 500,000, tried to make it a little more attractive. But AJ, if you have some more insights on this, that would be great.
Yeah, this one I like. It will maybe sneak into our practices, but I want to reiterate that we have to ensure that that wonderful word up there that says research, and the part that is associated with it under the code, you want to be very careful. No, you can't research if a sticky note can stick a little bit extra on this piece of paper or that. A lot of people are trying to stretch those rules. This credit is very cool, but be very careful to find the details of what actually it qualifies under the research. So I've seen people take some unusual positions, and the IRS doesn't look nicely upon that. So that's what I got on that one. Great.
Well, I will go to the next one. I know there was a lot of stuff in the bill that was either direct tax credits or kind of, touched on tax policy. And so I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to walk through some of those.
All right. Is that for Jeff or for me? Just kidding, Jeff.
That's for
I will take these now. Just so everybody knows, we're not diving deep into the weeds. We only have an hour today, so I'm going to kind of go over a few things that should affect all of our clients. The first one, of course, is the non-business energy property credit. That's kind of like the qualified, the mortgage interest deduction never seems to, or the mortgage insurance never seems to go away. It was supposed to expire at the end of 2021. And remember, this is a lifetime $500 cap. But now it's back, and it's been extended through 2032. However, the old rules are still going to exist through 2022. So we're still going to be under the rules of the $500 cap through 2022. And then starting in 2023, where you got the credit, which is going to increase from 10% to 30%. And it's going to give us such things, instead of a $500 max credit for the lifetime, it's establishing an annual limit of $1,200. Some of the things that will qualify for that is pretty cool. $150 credit if you have, probably in Iowa here, we have Mid-American Energy comes in, does a home energy audit. If you have the receipt and can prove it, it's $150 credit. $600 for qualified energy property credit per year for skylights, exterior windows, $500 aggregate on all exterior doors. No, a garage door is not a door. It's got to actually go into a living space. Now, your cousin Louie could be living in the garage, but that's still not going to count for yourself. $2,000, up to $2,000 though for a heat pump, water heater, or biomass stove or boiler. And then we have what used to be known as the residential energy efficiency property under 25 cap DH, which is now called the residential clean energy credit. These things have been extended through 2034. And what are they? They are the solar electric, the solar hot water. Solar is a pretty big deal. A lot of people are going to it. Fuel cell, small wind energy, geothermal heat pump. That's very popular. I know in this area where it gets a little bit chilly in the wintertime. Biomass fuel property installed in homes. So look at all of that, generally effective for expenditures after 12/31 in 2021. So, and it's been extended through 34. The rates are a little bit different. It's 26% for 2020, 26% through or prior to 1/1 of 2022. So many dates, sorry. From 22 through 32, it's 30% of property installed. 33, it goes down to 26%. And then I think 20 or 22% in 34 as it phases out. We also have what we call the new energy home credit under 133.04. That's been extended through 2032, increases the credit up to $5,000 depending on energy and efficiency requirements. The new requirements are for homes acquired after 12/31/22. So the old rules will still be in place for 2022 tax returns. Let's see, new efficiency home credit wage requirements. You can dive into deep. I don't know. Pretty much if you have a client that builds new homes, definitely want to look into that. This one is a very popular one. The new clean vehicle credit was the qualified plug-in electric drive motor vehicle credit. Yeah, try to say that 10 times. So just know that the new clean vehicle credit kind of wipes out the requirement. The old requirement was $7,500. The new one, the credit was $75,000, but under the old one, you had a breakdown between certain items had to be, which you get $5,000 and then $2,500. This, if you have your electrical engineering credit degree, is $3,750 for the critical minerals requirement and $3,750 for the battery component requirement. All right, so it eliminates, this is interesting, it eliminates the limitation on the number of vehicles eligible for the credit after 12/31/22. So such things as Tesla, Toyota, I know those two manufacturers, you no longer get a credit because they reach their cap. But after 12/31/22, the cap is off. So I think that's a huge advantage for everybody in the market, especially the more popular ones. So there we have it. So everything's off, and it did a couple of other things, such as the final assembly. We're not going to get into what exactly the final assembly means, but it kind of means what it says. Must occur in North America, and that's effective August 17th, 2022, the day after the bill was signed. And a question out there for everybody, is Mexico and Canada in North America? Yes, it is. North America is just not the United States. So the final assembly of vehicle must occur in North America. That includes Mexico and Canada. Now, however, the manufacturer, now, not the price that we pay it for, but it seems like there's not much negotiations anymore with new vehicles. The manufacturer, the SMRP, it's limited to 55,000 for electric cars, so it has to be under the 55, or 80,000 for SUVs, pickups, trucks, and vans. But remember, note, it's the MSPR or MSRP price of the new vehicles. All right. So, and new guidance for meeting these requirements. Shocking, it's not out yet. It's supposed to be out by 12/31/22. Has to have the VIN, right? The vehicle identification number must be included on the tax return to claim the credit. The new income limitations. So not only do we have a limitation on the cost of the vehicle, we also have limitations on, of course, we got to have MEGI, right? The modified adjusted gross income. Not really going to go into the definition of what qualifies, because it seems like every credit has a different definition of modified adjusted gross income. However, the income is $300,000 for married filing joint. Had a household, it's $225,000. Single or married filing separately would be $150,000. So modified adjusted gross income, just a little teaser, doesn't, it's the amount excluded, AGI plus any amount excluded under the 900 code sections, which would be your foreign earned income or housing cost amounts. Just know that we're going to have to calculate that. The credit is not includable. I repeat, not includable in gross income of the taxpayer. So just keep that in mind. But I think we'll see this more. Then we'll have to worry about the 15% minimum tax credit, because we're going to see more and more people buy these vehicles if gas continues. Gas has come down. Starting in 2024, I repeat, starting in 2024, you can transfer this credit to the dealer. So you go in and you're going to buy a vehicle for under $55,000. You can transfer this credit of $7,500 back to the dealer. So if the price was $47,500, you transfer the credit back to the dealer and you buy it for $40,000. However, this credit has to be reconciled on the tax return. And even though, based on my understanding of the law, even though you transfer the credit to the dealer, you still have to reconcile it on your individual tax return. That all starts in 2024. So there's some interesting components there. We also have previously owned clean vehicles. It's a credit equals the lesser of $4,000 or 30% of the sales price of the vehicle. Yeah, lesser of $4,000 or 30%. There's also income limitations, just like on the new car, but hence, if you buy a new car, it's 300, but if you buy a used car, it's 150,000, essentially cut all the new vehicle limits in half. So previously owned clean vehicle credit is 150,000, threshold amounts 112,500 for head of household and $75,000 for single or married filing separately. Again, it's based on the modified adjusted gross income. Previously owned clean vehicles must be sold by a dealer. So you can't go out there and sell yours and they would be able to receive a credit for it. The model year must be at least 2 years earlier than the year in which the taxpayer acquires the vehicle. Why can't they just make simple language for us all? I do not know. Let's see what else we have. The sales price must be less than 25,000. A used Pinto was 25,000 anymore. No, sorry, that's a very old car for you youngsters in the class. The gross vehicle weight rate of less than 14,000 pounds. This again, we're still talking about the previously owned clean vehicle. Qualified buyer must be an individual who purchased the vehicle for use, not for resale. And the VIN's got to be included on the tax return, and you can only take this credit once in a 3-year period. You can transfer the credit registered dealer beginning in 2024. Another thing, a couple more things, guys, I'll get it back to you. The premium tax credit has been extended. This will make health insurance more affordable for a number of people. So I think this is a good thing. It's been extended. Indexing was to resume in 2023 because the American Rescue Plan Act, too many acts to remember, extended it, right? More people are eligible, and you probably saw it on your tax returns that you filed for your clients. Sometimes people had to pay it back, but because of the limits were raised, more people are entitled to additional credits out there. So we'll see this. It's available between 100% and 40%. It extends the American Rescue Plan Rules Act through 2025. So it's always good, I think, is just to look at this law, as I know I'm rambling through in 10 minutes or less, and just take some basic notes, put it in a Word document. That way you'll have all these dates. You know, look, we got different adjusted gross incomes, different dates for this, energy credits for this year, energy credits going forward. So make sure that you update your organizers accordingly. We also have the qualified commercial clean vehicle under code section 45 cap V. V is in Victor. If you're interested in that, the vehicle has a gross weight rating of less than 14,000 pounds. You get $7,500. Oh boy.
Yes,
AJ,
we're getting some questions about a summary. So I know that we've had some high level summaries that have gone out through eAlert, but we will send out, we'll make sure we send out a more detailed summary. So folks can reference. I know it's hard to digest all the details at once.
Sorry.
There's lots of good sort of breakdowns of the bill. And so we will make sure to send one out to folks that you can sort of reference back to some of these details. If you have a question, I know some folks are doing this. If you have a question, put it in the Q&A section of the Zoom, because we will try to touch on the questions. And there are a couple, if you have AJ, maybe now's a good time. There are a couple questions that have come through sort of on what you said that I could throw at you.
All right. Yes.
One, it says if the electric vehicle car credit is not refundable, I assume the taxpayer may have to pay it back if they gave it to a dealer and at tax time it does not qualify.
It's not includable in income. It's non-refundable. So if for some reason they gave it to the dealer and then they win the lottery, or they not win the lottery, but their income goes up, they could possibly have to pay it back. Because remember, if you purchase the vehicle in March for $47,500 is my example, but only pay 40 because you transfer the credit. But when you reconcile the credit and let's say you get divorced in a year and your income is above the $150,000, yeah, I would think that's a great question. I haven't thought about that, but yeah, you would not then be eligible under the rules, and you purchased a car for 40, but actually you just purchased it for 47.5. And when because at the end of the day, even though we transferred it to the dealer, the person purchasing the car is the one responsible for reconciling on the tax return.
Great. And still on the electric vehicle, we had one question and then we had a helpful answer. Someone said, on the vehicle EV credit, will there be some tool or lookup to clarify which vehicles qualify or meets these percentage of manufacturing in America? And
yes, and it's not necessarily based on the percentage, but it's the final assembly has to take place, and I believe they are going to just as they did, because I printed it, just as they did on the plug-in vehicle. I had the Department of, where's this come from?
And someone provided a link actually after that. Someone provided a link where you can look up a VIN number to see if it's eligible.
Okay.
So that's in the Q&A if folks are interested in that.
And that's based on the list of vehicles with final assembly in North America. Yeah, the Alternate Fuels Data Center. This is by the United States Department of Energy. And even though it will, if you click on it, which I just did, and that's what I reported or printed, it will say like the 2022 Tesla models sales cap have been met. Remember what I said though, going forward in 2023, they could sell millions upon millions. There's no cap. But this list is a great list because this will tell you, even though it says manufacturing cap sales met for the Chevrolet Bolt in 2023, there are no limits, but this is a great, thank you for whoever put that in, because I printed it and I guess I didn't put it anywhere, but this is the list of the cars. You just click on it. It takes you there. Why don't everybody do it right now? If you can, look in a Q&A, print on it, put it up into your favorite, and that way you'll have it. So even though, remember, if it says caps met, don't worry about that because that goes out the window under the new rules. So anyway.
Great. Back to the stock buyback provision. We had a question. How do you expect the stock buyback to apply to redemptions of preferred stock? This would affect income investors. You have thoughts on that?
Save the credit. At the end of the day, yeah, I mean, how does it affect investors? It's definitely going to not affect the tax community because we're not, unless you represent or do tax returns for Coca-Cola or whoever's buying back the stock. How does it affect the investors? It's going to affect investors because there's going to be an additional fee that the company is going to have to pay, and then that's probably going to reduce the preferred stock percentage that you're going to receive. What that will be, probably not more than a couple of You know, if the preferred rate was 6.5, maybe now it's 6.45. I don't see it being a huge deal, but I haven't looked into it that closely.
Um, and one other question, it says on the vehicles, if you transfer the credit to the dealer, do you have to pay the sales tax on the whole amount?
Well, that is going to be a state by state issue, but I would imagine that's going to be similar to when you trade a vehicle in and the purchase price is 30 and you get 10,000 for the trade-in, you only pay sales tax on 20. Whereas if you sold your vehicle on the outside market and took $10,000 cash in and bought it for the full price. So yes, I would think, but it's based on each state, but based on the general philosophy of a trade-in value, if you get the credit, I would imagine it's going to reduce it, but that's going to be a state by state deal.
Great. So we had lots of comments that folks would love to get sort of a high level summary and details of what you spoke about. As I said, there's some summaries that we've already provided through eAlert, and then there's lots of detailed summaries. So we will make sure to get something out to you guys, and AJ will consult with you to make sure it sort of captures everything that you spoke about. But I know it was a lot of information, so folks want something they can.
Yeah, that was
great. It was great. But we will but let's move on to the next piece. So one of the things we wanted to cover was the IRS funding and everything that's happening with IRS, since that was such a big part of this bill. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then there are a few other things at the end that have happened at the IRS just the last week that we wanted to touch on. But Jeff, I will go ahead and turn it over to you to talk about
Great.
IRS.
Great. Okay, so the bottom line is the IRS is getting a little bit less than $80 billion. So what does that mean? It means that they have 10 years approximately, some cases longer, to spend a account that's set up for them. Theoretically, they will continue to receive an annual budget from the government, and that 80 billion will be considered to be on top of that. To put it in perspective, their FY 2021 budget was 13.7 billion. So, easy way is to think that they're going to get an extra 8 billion to spend each year. Now, getting that off the ground, early years, maybe they'll spend less. Theoretically, they'll spend more as things really get cranky. A couple of things to keep in mind with that. Congress can't restrict later Congresses from making changes. So, Congresses can come and claw back some or all that hasn't been spent. And they tend to do that. I mean, they did it a little bit. It showed up in the COVID relief, where they basically said, well, we're going to do something else over here. And in order to spend it, we're going to go and claw back money that we set out there for various reasons. So there's lots and lots of examples of that sort of clawback thing. The other piece is this sort of, that's kind of, you wouldn't even have to claw it back. What you could do is you could just cut back on their annual budget, fiscal budget that's appropriated, and sort of, then it would require the IRS to then pull more money out of this account. So there's lots of ways where they could not end up with 80 billion. And my experience has been in 35 plus years of watching IRS funding or congressional projects that they want the agency to do, is they start out a lot of energy, Congress is very focused, a lot of support, and then about 3 to 4 years later, they can't even remember why they gave them that money, and they basically changed direction. So I would say that this is probably definitely additional serious funding for the agency for 2 years. because that, the Biden administration can protect the money even if there's a change in Congress. Could go as long as 4. And then, you never know. I mean, if this is something that once you have funds that are obligated, it's kind of hard to claw it back. So if you've got large computer programming contracts that are in place, Congress's ability to sort of undo those obligations is much more difficult. So 80 billion, how are they supposed to spend it? There is some very high level allocations that are put in there. And the important thing to remember is what we would think of as when we say some of these titles may not actually be what it's for. So you got 3.1 billion of that 80, a little less than 80 billion is supposed to go towards something called taxpayer services. On the other hand, 45.6 billion in change is supposed to go to quote unquote enforcement. There's also on top of that 25.3 billion for operation support, which is really actually pretty key. So let's break that down a little bit. Taxpayer service, the agency looks at taxpayer services like you call up and you've got a general tax question. It may be a walk-in branch and someone comes in with their tax return, they're confused. It's more, maybe the IRS website's on there, parts of it not, but it's much more sort of benign, if you would. I've got a question and I don't, I didn't hire an enrolled agent to help me. The enforcement account, on the other hand, and this is something that, that NAEA has harped on for years, is, one person's enforcement is another person's accounts management. So, I've got this letter from the IRS saying they just made a change to my tax return, and if I have a question, I'll call this number. Now, is that enforcement or is that taxpayer service? You call the 800 number that's provided on there and say, why did you take 1,000, make a change here? Well, you got a math error. I don't, for whatever reason. Where's my tax return? Some sort of screen has picked that up. There's the 800 number. So a lot of the sort of what I would call accounts inquiries are actually going to be an enforcement. So your taxpayer reps generally are a lot of them are going to be found in that enforcement account. So I think a lot of people's taxpayer service issues are going to be resolved there. Just simple notices, CP 2000, those sorts of things. Obviously, those are going to be over there. Then you've got your real enforcement issues. Auditors. Audit is going to get a real beef up, and they're going to start doing, maybe cracking the 1% point of audits of tax returns. Right, it was about 3.5% of returns were audited when I was a young pup in the Senate Finance. Now it's way down, and they, in those days, an audit was an audit. It wasn't a letter saying, "Hey, please justify, some deduction." It was a real, we were face to face with someone. So a lot of those correspondence audits have kind of jump that number up, and that number is still abysmal. So auditing, definitely going to see a lot more audits, businesses and individuals. It used to be that every large company over a certain size had a full-time IRS person. That has really, really been cut back. The idea here is that there will be someone there all year long with a little office, drinking their coffee and parking in your parking lot. There'll be a lot more of that sort of high level, corporate level folks. ACS. ACS is the most effective of the compliance tools that the agency has. To get a sense of it, You can look at the special compliance personnel. That's the one area where the agency's received dedicated funding that includes cost of labor, fully loaded, light bulbs, paper clips, computer screens, phones. That's why you're required, if you get a special compliance personnel inquiry, you have to call a certain 800 number to deal with the ACS person, because they are like the old-fashioned ACS. ACS, as they've lost money, ACS became a lot more like just a regular old account rep. They weren't working cases, they were just responding to notices that were going out. But compliance personnel, in 2022, 3/4, they've raised $1.2 billion. And the labor for that was a little over 14 million. And the overhead was a little bit more than 9 million, for a cost of about $24 million to bring in revenues of $1.213. So 50% return. So you're going to see, I think, in the compliance area that the ACS guys, they will, in some senses, max out, because that's the most efficient return on investment for the IRS. But Fields Collections is 1/3 of what it used to be 10 years ago. That will go back up. So the guys that are taking the more complicated cases, that are actually showing up and knocking on doors, working cases individually, Fields Collections will go up considerably. Criminal investigations, I mean, you know, last time criminal investigation was actually well funded, there wasn't even anything that resembled anything called cryptocurrency. So right now they spend less than, I don't know, 5% on cryptocurrency sort of things, which are just purely criminal, you know, transfers of money. You're going to see that go way up. So a lot of money towards large corporate, where really the IRS is just outmanned, outgunned. I've said for years that with the IRS's level of funding, that corporate auditing was real. I mean, corporate taxes were really kind of a voluntary thing on the part of American corporations, how patriotic they are, because when you've got your own major tax group, and then you've got an accounting firm, and then you've got 1 or 2 law firms on retainer, and then you've got one, you know, IRS auditor trying to figure out all your transfer pricing and everything else. It's just, you know, just pay something, right? It's a voluntary system at that point. So you're going to see it get tougher. I mean, you're going to have one whole IRS person per, you know, 300 expensive tax professionals. So, you know, as I say on the taxpayer service side, at the very least, they're going to go back to their old lousy level of customer service. But there are some interesting other things. Business systems modernization, that's for new systems. You've got money for the Treasury IG for oversight. Tax policy gets a little something. Tax court gets something. And then there are some other aspects that Treasury has brought in some, at least one expert. I think they're going to bring in more. And then the one I think we really need to keep an eye on, it's something the IRS has just not wanted to do, and this is, you know, having their own software. You know, it's called direct e-file system. There's $15 million to study and put together a design for that. You know, I assume they will bring in someone and have them run it. The issue for me on the IRS having a free system, besides just taxpayers being generally skeptical about free things from the IRS, is really customer service. You know, is the agency's record on their own handling their own customer service is abysmal. So I'm doing the software and it keeps freezing every time I try to put in this one form. Who are you going to call, as they say, right? Are you going to call the IRS and say, why doesn't this darn thing work? And is anyone going to answer the phone? So customer service, updates, IRS tends to put together kind of clunky software systems, and then over time they become almost unusable. So, but it's something we have to look out for. If the whole free tax filing clinics and stuff like that, it started out small and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And you're in some small towns and you got 3 tax preparers there, and one of them says, well, I'm going to open up a free filing clinic and get some money from the IRS and give it away for free, and they're competing against the other 2. So it could have an effect, and it certainly will have some effects on the margin. So I do worry about it.
Jeff, we got a question on that, which you might have I think you sort of just answered, but from Dave Tollett, he said, what are NAEA's thoughts on the 15 million funding for IRS to evaluate offering free tax return prep software?
I think the IRS is good at some things, like, auditing and collections and criminal investigations, and sometimes processing tax returns, at least in the past. The 2 things that they're abysmal at is software development and customer service. So, any sort of free filing thing is going to require those 2 things. And I don't think this 80 billion is going to solve the IRS's long-term management problems around coding, providing a system that's convenient and useful, and then the customer service side. You use it once, and then I had a problem, and no one, I couldn't get anyone in the IRS to help me. Well, the heck with that. I'm going back to my old place. But there's also this sort of skepticism around, going to the IRS. I mean, how's the IRS? How the software companies and your representative within the Circular 230 and other requirements, how are they going to decide? They're going to decide in my favor, as long as you're compliant with the law and they've done their due diligence with you. But is the agency going to do that? I mean, is the agency's interpretation of some of these things are different? And so am I going to rely on their advice, if you were? So it'll be interesting. The free file system was there. I used it for all my kids. And then, most of them, after a few years, called me and said, can you get me an enrolled agent? So as soon as it got complicated, but, and I assume that's what'll happen here as well.
One other question, which I know you touched on, but it's probably the question everybody cares about maybe the most. Will the phones improve? Do you think this 80 billion is going to turn things around for the phones?
Yeah, I mean, the IRS has the same problem that every, I've made a couple trips west, did a kind of a RV thing through the national parks, and every small town I went to was like, please be nice to our people. We can't hire enough people. So, the states like Utah have, the agency, their service center in Utah has been one of the best. Well, the unemployment rate in Utah is like 1%. And the corporations have figured out what the IRS found out a long time ago, is that there's a good, well-educated workforce in the state of Utah, and their skiing is great there, much better than Fresno. So let's go to Utah. So, the agency is just as Thad and I worked on this for other clients, just background checks. If you're going to add a couple thousand people into this system, and they got to do background checks where, getting background checks are 6-month wait. So, and then if they don't get the hiring flexibilities that we've, NAEA has talked about, it can take 10 months just for a normal job. Who's going to wait around to see if they got a job at the IRS? If it's, if it takes 10 months to get through and get all your paperwork done. So background checks and all that. So they're going to have a hiring problem just like everyone else. And maybe if we have like a real recession, it'll be better. They'll get the hire people faster. But there's already people in the pipeline. I think the agency, they keep saying, but then we keep getting like more details around, backlogs of tax returns. They need to get, this is something else we've been talking about and that we've got in our white papers and stuff. I mean, the agency needs to go to a paperless environment. They need to figure out where they've got, clogs. CAF is a great example, right? You got all these systems that get a power of attorney into them, and then they've still got to have some GS5, pull it up on their screen and say yes or no, because your address you typed in was incorrect, or you left off limited, or you put some other silliness, and then you reject it, and the taxpayer finds out 8 weeks later by snail mail that some guy tried to file a power of attorney for you. So they've got to fix those bottlenecks, the 941s, less than 50% electronic filing for those places where you can't file electronically, you have to file paper. All of that stuff needs to be fixed. And when that happens, you can take people off of those sorts of duties and put them into duties that help the phones improve. So I think we're going to see it before this money even gets spent. I think you're going to see an improvement because the agency's already has people in the pipelines. And then COVID's behind. Hopefully they don't have major shutdowns where people are, having to work from home. I mean, they were hiring people and giving them a laptop and sending them home. And my favorite ones, a old agent wrote into Michelle and said, I waited for 45 minutes. I finally got on. And then the person said, I'm sorry, I can't help you because my laptop doesn't work. And you're like, well, why are you answering the phone? Because they're getting paid to. So they were just answering and saying, I'm sorry, I can't help you. So getting people into work, that'll help as well. So we're going to see some improvement with what's in the system already.
No, that's great. We'll quickly go through a few more slides that we have. And then I know there are more questions coming in. I know there were some topics that sort of developed the last week or two that AJ wanted to hit on. So let's see if we can cover all that in the last 10 minutes here. And this was in the e-alert. There was a link in the e-alert. I'm sure it's on the website too, if folks want to look at the full letter. But NAEA did send a letter to IRS sort of detailing thoughts around the $80 billion in funding that went out on Friday to both Treasury and the IRS. Just high level, big focus on customer service, fixing the problems there, improving technology and giving EAs digital tools to help them do their job. And then some of the hiring and training issues that Jeff just touched on. And Secretary Yellen released first a memo saying she wanted a detailed plan from the IRS in 6 months on how they were going to spend the money. And then she released a letter, and just wanted to highlight it because we do feel like the goals that she listed in that letter, as well as in the memo, really reflected some of the things that we've been pushing for, which is modernizing the agency, dealing with the backlogs and improving taxpayer services, obviously overhauling their IT systems, and then going back to the hiring issues and making sure that they're investing in training. As everyone's been watching the news and has seen that this has kind of become a political football. And so I don't know if we have time to sort of dive deep into that, but Rettig and others have been trying to, push back and sort of highlight that there's not going to be, 80,000 new armed IRS agents, that this is really about, hopefully will be about doing smarter tax enforcement, more targeted tax enforcement, but not sort of, harassing honest Americans.
I didn't even take it much further. If it was just the old language was about harassment, this thing about armed and that sort of stuff, that just puts people's lives in danger. And a lot of these federal buildings, you've got IRS and FBI. And, those of us who remember Oklahoma City, that this sort of language, this inflammatory language, is that if people are meeting with their representatives, and they're voicing that sort of language, this armed business, I think it's something that we should really take a hard stand on, because people's lives are in danger.
And Jeff, I don't know if you want to touch on this. The IRS sort of had shared internally last week that they are making some changes to implement this bill and, organize themselves.
What's interesting is, this is my problem with the agency, and this is something we found in the restructuring commission back in the the late 90s, is the IRS doesn't know what they don't know. And that's a problem. They are the most insular, rise up through the ranks of, I'm hired as a collection officer, and as long as I'm over in collections and that's what I do, it's great. But, they don't make the best accounts management people at that training. I mean, in other words, I've got millions of calls coming in, and I've got to deal with inquiries, around people's accounts. I got to make decisions about what sort of technology we put in place to help people. And I think we see it time and time again when we've asked them to do an electronic signature using private sector to do that. They built it themselves, and it actually works pretty well. The problem is it doesn't go anywhere. It just goes right back over to CAF and gets in line with all the other returns. Although there has been some signs that that they're actually kind of putting it in front of the line, but that's a whole nother thing. So this is great, but if they're just populating it with IRS people, then they don't know what they don't know. So what I'm hoping from a new commissioner is that, and Thad and I have been involved in some of that, they are looking at change managers, people that have done large accounts, financial institutions, that sort of stuff, bringing in someone that really understands, how to bring technology, change business processes so that folks are not waiting online and then getting hung up on, and that the whole system is analyzed on how they can get rid of these places where there are backlogs. And this is great, but for every IRS, every one of those places, there should be a private sector or someone that comes in from outside of the IRS, along with the internal IRS person, to run each of these things. Or otherwise, we're going to just be doing the same thing. It's going to keep doing the same thing they've done poorly over the last 40 years.
AJ, we've got a few more minutes. Do you want to hit on, I know that I think it was just a few days ago or mid last week or late last week that the IRS released the penalty relief, the COVID penalty relief around the filing. You want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. I'd love to. Notice 2022-36, essentially, they might call it blanket relief, but it isn't blanket relief. But it centers that the 19 and 20, if the returns have not been filed, as long as they're filed or were filed by September 30th of 2022, the failure to file penalty goes away. That's on the 1040 series, the 1041 series, 1120, 1065, 1120S. But most importantly, a lot of people don't deal with foreign transactions, but the 5471 and the 3520, those also come into play. 3520 penalties are huge. That is when you have a distribution from a foreign trust or estate. And it's not that rare for people to have relatives overseas set up an estate. So just know that these forms for 19 and 20 have failure to file relief, not failure to pay relief, but failure to file. It is automatic. If you filed a return earlier for a 19 or 20 that was late, they're supposed to automatically now reimburse you, or even if it's paid. So make sure that you go through your client list and kind of figure that out. If you've received, these are some of the questions we don't know yet. If let's say today you receive a notice that you owe X because it was filed late, I do know that the 503, 504s and the 1058 letters have been suspended, but everything is supposed to be done automatically. They're supposed to reimburse you the failure to file penalty and the interest associated with that. Also, if you filed 1099s late in 19 and 20, as long as they were filed by August 1st of 20 or August 1st of 21, that is supposed to be refunded. That's kind of it in a very quick nutshell. Do we have time, or can I just touch briefly on the new student loan debt relief, or do you want me to
Sure.
take that? Okay. Student loan debt relief was announced, $10,000 automatic relief, or $20,000 if you had a Pell Grant. What do you mean automatic relief? The government currently has 8,000 names, or not 8,000, I'm sorry, 8 million. These are based on the income repayment automatic, the people that have to log into the system, put their income in, and it's based income-based repayment. They have those names, so that will be automatic. Within the next few weeks, they're supposed to develop a website so you can go on and apply. The limit is earning less than 125,000 a year or 250,000 a year for married filing joint. We're assuming that's adjusted gross income. Also, payback is now went from 10% down to 5%. But back on the student loan, if we have any clients that are under extension that this would qualify for, make sure you look at the married filing separately filing to get them underneath the income level. It's similar to what we did with the child tax credit. So it's limited to the balance due. So if the balance due is 8,500, that's all you're going to get relief. That is very quickly in a nutshell, but look at the married filing separately. It's based on the most recently filed return. I know there was a White House briefing that talked about based on 20 or 21, but remember, White House briefings are not substantial authority. We don't know, even though the loan, also the student loan pushback, it goes from August 31st back to December 31st, so no payments have to be made. You can make payments, but you don't have to. And then finally, are they going to look at the 2022 income for the application of the income limits for this? We don't know yet, but keep that in mind to look at married filing separately. Whew, that's it.
Great. Well, Meg, maybe we'll kick it back over to you. I'll just say we'll coordinate with everyone and make sure we get some additional information out about the EV credit and some of the other details. And I think this conversation will continue. I think that we'll have other opportunities for folks to ask questions and dive into some of these provisions. But I'll give it back to you, Meg.
Thank you, guys. That was really great. And thank you for the additional added value comments at the end on some of these other things. They're all very important questions. And as Thad said, we will continue to monitor the situation and release information as it becomes available. So thank you all for attending the webinar. I would just like to provide a couple of reminders or updates on other things that we have going on in the next couple months. We have our first regional Learn event in Pittsburgh coming up on September 26th and 27th, and it will be covering trusts, and anyone who attends and goes through the whole program will receive a certificate of completion. Also in Pittsburgh in September, we are doing our SSLA leadership program, and that will be September 27th and 28th. And you can find all that information on our website if you're interested in registering for that. And I also wanted to just mention that tomorrow we'll be releasing or opening up the next window for our scholarship applications. So if you know any aspiring EAs who are looking for some help, we have scholarships for exam fees as well as review courses. And we also, new this year, we are adding in NTPI scholarships. So if you are an enrolled agent and a member and haven't yet done the NTPI program, we are offering a scholarship for the first part that is completely online right now. And all those scholarships will be available on our website starting tomorrow. So look for the links in the newsletter. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out. So thanks everybody for your time. And thank you, gentlemen, for all of your insight and expertise. We really appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.